And we're back and inside the ropes, and I am enjoying my last moments of relaxation because in 4 nights' time, I am not going to be relaxed because I'm going to probably be losing my shit with laughter because the man that's on the line with me right now is going to be live on stage in Glasgow, Scotland at the Classic Grand, his first ever international appearance. He is the number one WWE fanboy of the world. He is the legendary wrestling manager and humanitarian of the decade, Mr. Jim Cornette. Jim, welcome back.
Kenny, thank you very much for having me on the program. I am a humanitarian. I can't explain to you how much that I'm looking forward to the UK tour and the chance to bring my experience to the world.
There you go. And I guess, but the biggest thing that's happening right now in wrestling, is the departure of CM Punk from the WWE. Of what we know now, in case it's some elaborate work, but by the WWE.
It's not a work. It's not a work.
Okay,
he left and he went home, and I bless him for that because. To be honest, Punk has always been a goal-driven guy. I spoke to Lance Storm for my podcast this week on the Jim Cornette Experience, MLW.com, for those so inclined. And, he likened it to Jericho. Jericho, when he didn't have anything creatively left to fulfill for himself, and he wanted to get the thrill of touring with Fozzy. He was happier to be in front of 1,500 people with Fozzy than 15,000 with the WWF because it's something that he had not done. And with Punk, bless him. I can identify if you're burnout and you just don't enjoy going to work every day and your body's beat up and you want to take some time off. I've been there. We did it with the Midnight Express in 1990 when we quit WCW. And I was there when I quit Ring of Honor in 2012. Bless him. Go home. Stay there. You got more money than the federal government. And, until you feel like you want to get back in wrestling, stay home and enjoy yourself. I am fully behind CM Punk and doing same.
One of the things that we've been talking about in the show in the last couple of weeks is WrestleMania, because WrestleMania season's coming up, and you've got quite an interest in history with WrestleMania, and I think because I presume that you would have been sort of entrenched in working with the Midnight Express and the Crockett's when WrestleMania 1 came around. And do you remember when it happened? Like, because I assume that like with Liberace and Cyndi Lauper and all these sort of mainstream stars coming in, did you think it was going to take off like it did? And what were your thoughts about it at that time?
Oh, God. And, this is coming from a guy who, my first WrestleMania, the first time that I ever stepped foot in Madison Square Garden, New York, the first time that I appeared on WrestleMania, I was managing the WWF champion in the main event. And, and I'd never, to be quite perfectly honest, I'd never aspired to work for the WWF. And this was all coming by accident. And, I was thrilled because it was cool, but at the same time, I was like, all these people who have strived and worked their entire life to work for the WWF, to make it to WrestleMania, to even be on the opening match, and suddenly here I am, never wanted to be here, just happened by happenstance, and I'm the main event in Madison Square Garden in New York City at WrestleMania. It was cool. It was cool for a wrestling fan, which I am. But I never aspired to be there. And, that's the thing is that I've had a lot of WrestleMania moments, but I never tried to. And maybe that's the secret. Maybe that is, don't try to work for that goal. Just wait till it happens. And, so I'm blessed in that I had that opportunity, but at the same point, that was never my goal.
But what do you remember when you were like in 1985, when you were working with the Midnight Express and this whole WrestleMania thing was going on across the country?
Oh, we were horrified because we were still in the wrestling business, and we were in Dallas working for World Class Wrestling, the Von Erichs, at the time, and we thought these fucking assholes in New York City are exposing the business and making it a show business instead of a sport, and we have to do everything we can to not draw a comparison between ourselves and WrestleMania. The booker, Ken Mantell at the time, there had been exposés on 2020, and people were starting to look at wrestling, and he said, we don't want any high spots over 4 phases. In other words, drop down, tackle, hip toss, kick off, get it again. That's, that's as far as we were allowed to go, because they didn't want anything that would lead the people to believe that wrestling was fixed, choreographed, phony, whatever. It's been exposed. It's been revealed. It's been, now people look at wrestling as, oh, that entertaining show we watch once a week, but we can't take it seriously. And, when I got in the business, it was taken seriously and it was treated as legitimate. And it's a whole different thing these days.
Well, you mentioned WrestleMania 10 and the fact that you hadn't really aspired to get there and you kind of ended up there. But I mean, we've got to talk about the jacket. I mean, that jacket from WrestleMania 10 that you had was just it's funny because I almost have this image of you in that WrestleMania 10 jacket walking down the hall of Madison Square Garden, walking past like the fake Bill Clinton and Rhonda Shear, and just like shaking your head, going, "What the fuck is this?" Like, I just have this image of that.
There was an element of that, yes, but at the same time, I was respectful of that. I was in New York, the biggest city in the country, one of the biggest cities in the world, and I was someplace that people aspired their whole life in wrestling. Some people to be, and I was there, trying to uphold the tradition of pro wrestling, not as sports entertainment, but as sport. And I'm here. I'm like sleeping with the enemy. It was bizarre. It was bizarre. It really was.
And you managed a couple of WrestleManias, but obviously WrestleMania 10 would be the kind of big one for you. But you were backstage at WrestleMania 14. I think you actually worked the Battle Royal with the Midnight Express, I think, at that time. But I just wondered...
That was WrestleMania 17 when I was in the gimmick Battle Royal.
Oh, so I thought that you'd worked with the new Midnight Express in that like 15.
No, because that was so sad. But WrestleMania 17, I actually wrestled. I have wrestled on a WrestleMania card.
I do remember this. How did this? Because I remember the graphic like 2 weeks before WrestleMania 17. They were saying all these guys are going to be in the match. And your graphic was it, and I kind of figured you were going to be a manager or something, and then you come out with a tennis racket and you get in there and get in about it. So how did that come about? Did they just ask you to do it, or?
Well, actually, I was operating OVW, Ohio Valley Wrestling at the time here in Louisville, and I brought the developmental program, training the superstars like Brock Lesnar and Randy Orton and Batista and John Cena, those guys here in Louisville, my hometown. And Bruce Pritchard was still with the office and called me one day and said, "Hey, you guys, you're coming down for meetings at WrestleMania. You want to be in the Gimmick Battle Royal?" And I said, "I'll be in the Gimmick Battle Royal if you're in there, so I have somebody to fight with." And Brother Love, Bruce Pritchard was Brother Love, and he said, "I'm going to be in it." I said, "All right, I'll be in it too." And we went off in the corner, and it was funny because as we went off in the corner, I said, "We're going to take care of each other so we don't get hurt because we're both too old for this." And I hit him in the stomach, and he bent over to sell it and headbutted me in the chin and bloused gave me a fat lip. And then I hit him again with the tennis racket, and he sold it some way and hit me again. And then I hit him, and I blacked his eye, and we beat each other up without meaning to in the corner. And then finally, Hillbilly Jim eliminated me. But yeah, I worked that match with a hernia that I had from Bob Armstrong, in developmental, landed in my stomach, and I got a hernia. And then he gave me a black eye and a fat lip, and I blistered him. So it was like one of the most deadly battle royals of all time. But it was cool because, once again, I have wrestled. Jim Cornette has wrestled at WrestleMania. And Steve Austin and The Rock being in the main event and drawing $50 million in one night was one of the most successful WrestleManias of all time. So I can say that I wrestled on one of the biggest grossing WrestleManias of all time. And once again, all this was by accident.
Well, the funny thing is like, among fans anyway, WrestleMania 17 is the one that people say is the best. So you wrestled on what arguably is people's favorite WrestleMania. So there you go. But I was just going to ask you about, because obviously WrestleMania 14, you were kind of around at that point doing the creative stuff, and I just wondered, for someone who was in the WWF, like, how important was the Mike Tyson thing? How important was that to WWF becoming bigger again? Because obviously the WWE stories say that he was a huge part of it, but what was he from your perspective?
Very huge. Mike Tyson was, a mainstream name and a household word. And, what I've said so is garbage, but a household word. But everybody knew who Mike Tyson was. And he brought instant recognition, instant credibility. And, that's when Austin was first taken off, and Steve Austin, the biggest box office attraction in the history of our sport. It helped him because there was Steve Austin rubbing elbows with Mike Tyson. And, Shawn Michaels at the time had his problems and his issues. He was a prick. Everybody knows it. And, well, no, I'm not breaking any new ground here. And, The Undertaker actually, after his match that night, came and taped his fists up and sat down at the gorilla position at the monitor backstage at the curtain. And if Shawn Michaels had not done business the right way and lost to Austin in the manner in which he was supposed to, then when he came back through that curtain, Undertaker would have beat the bloody shit out of him. Because Shawn Michaels was a prick and a prima donna, and it was all about him, and everybody knows it. And I'm not breaking any new ground or revealing anything that's a secret. And but he did business the right way, and as a result, Steve Austin became the biggest box office attraction in the history of our sport. And it was a thrill to be involved in that card, but at the same time, it was, oh my God, what's going to happen? Oh, Jesus Christ, because I was involved in the creative at that time rather than the performance end, and we didn't know. We didn't know what was going to happen. You couldn't trust Shawn Michaels. You couldn't trust him at all. He was in business for himself. And so we didn't know what was going to happen. And when it happened the way it happened and everything worked out well and the torch was passed to Steve Austin, that was the best thing for business. And it could have happened another way. And I promise you, Shawn Michaels would not have walked away from it. But it could have happened another way.
And we've got to give you some props, because one of the best things about WrestleMania 14 was the match with the Undertaker and Kane, and you pretty much were a part of the kind of build up to that. And I don't know if I can remember in the last 15 years a WrestleMania match that was built up any better than that particular match. What do you remember about your part in that build-up?
Well, I appreciate that. Glenn Jacobs Kane was a special talent, and I knew that he had a great upside and great potential when Dutch Mantell called me one day in Knoxville in 1995 and said, I got this kid. He's great. He's huge. He looks wonderful. He's sick of being in Puerto Rico. He wants to come back to the States. And his name's Glenn Jacobs, and, I think he's got a great upside. And so we made him Unabomb in Smoky Mountain Wrestling. And the Unabomber was hot then, back in those days in the United States. And we booked him, I did, against The Undertaker for his first time in Knoxville at the Super Bowl of Champions in August 1995, and Undertaker came in and wrestled him, and that was my idea. Here's a guy who can draw huge money on pay-per-view against The Undertaker. That was my sole purpose for giving Glenn his push. And so Undertaker went back and told Vince McMahon, hey, this kid, boy, he's going to be great. And of course, he went through his bad gimmicks, as Vince's want to give people. But finally, when they were about to fire him, they just said, hey, we got this idea, The Undertaker's evil brother. And I ran with that because Glenn deserved it, and he was a great talent. And they gave me the opportunity for a while to get a guy over unmolested. Russo didn't see anything in him, so he wasn't going to fuck with it. And, and we gave Kane the opportunity, and Russo truthfully wanted the match in October 1997. Kane interfered in the Hell in a Cell match with Undertaker and Shawn Michaels. That was my finish. That was my match. That was my idea. And we were leading to WrestleMania the following March, and Russo's like, well, what about if, he choke slams Undertaker through the table and, next week on Raw? And I'm like, you fucking idiot. They can't wrestle each other for 6 months. Let's not, shoot that right away, and let's have some patience. Let's build it. And for once, possibly the only time, I got my way, and we were able to build it until the following year, and it was a great WrestleMania match. And established Kane, and he has been, one of the Millionaires Club, making 7 figures a year for most of the time since then, based on the fact that, he's a tremendous talent, great kid, and had the look, the ability, and the passion to sometimes overcome bad creative and make himself a star. So, I like the fact that I had some play in establishing him, but it's the rest of it's been up to him.
Yeah, absolutely. I think two of my favorite parts of that story were the part where Kane sort of almost went babyface with The Undertaker at the Royal Rumble, but it was all just a setup. That was great, to watch when he helped Undertaker. And then the thing that I thought was just a really clever piece of booking, I guess you would call it, is at WrestleMania when they had the match, and I think Undertaker hit the 3rd tombstone, and he pinned Kane, but Kane kicked out like a second after the 3, and after it, Kane still looked just as strong going into it, but Undertaker obviously got the win. It was one of those ones that you watch back and go, that's kind of how it's done.
And you know what? I appreciate that, and that is the wrestling fans' point of view. But the thing that put Kane over the top was the fact that he didn't just appeal to the wrestling fan, he appealed to everybody, because my original vision was, my favorite horror movie is Halloween, Michael Myers. And that was my original vision of Kane when I got when I was told that Kane will be The Undertaker's evil brother that has existed all this time. What if he was like Michael Myers? What if he was like the main character in Halloween? What if he was like the embodiment of evil? And that was the flavor that people, not only wrestling fans, but just fans in general, just people watching the show, they got. This guy is the embodiment of evil. He's somewhat inhuman. He doesn't feel pain. He doesn't feel remorse. That was basically the thing that kicked Kane off. And then later on, of course, we did the dipsy doodles with him and the storyline business that you're talking about. But first and foremost, it was, this guy's Michael Myers. This guy is the Halloween character come to life. And everybody can identify with a spooky motherfucker that doesn't feel pain and just seeks to destroy people. And that was something that everybody could identify with, and that was what I gave to Kane. And then everything else he's done has been, he had some good creative and bad creative, but he is a great fucking guy, and he's a great kid, and he has taken the and made the most of what he's had to work with. But originally it was like, this guy's the star of Halloween. This guy is a monster. This guy is spooky, and nobody knows how exactly he got these powers. That was something that could appeal to everybody.
And 17 years later, he's still around. So it's, it definitely did something right. And I guess I don't know if this is a hard question for you to answer, because I know that you've said throughout this that, like, WrestleMania or WWE weren't exactly where you wanted to go, but is there any sort of fond WrestleMania memory you have? It doesn't even have to be something that happened in the ring, but is there any sort of memory you have about meeting any of the old timers or anything at a WrestleMania that you remember?
Oh, well, as far as meeting the old timers, it wasn't a WrestleMania, but it was Bad Blood. And I have bittersweet memories of this. It was in 1997. It was the pay-per-view that I was the one that got the phone call that Brian Pillman had passed away. It was one of the fondest nights of my life, and it was also one of the most, trying nights of my life, in that we were in St. Louis, and I had talked them into, Kevin Dunn, who was the executive producer of television, was against it. But I said, we're in St. Louis. St. Louis was the predominant city for pro wrestling in America for 3 decades. Sam Muchnick, the leader of the NWA, and the biggest drawing city for a period of time in wrestling. Let's have the old NWA champions there. And we had Lou Thez and Harley Race and Dorian Terry Funk and Jack Briscoe and Gene Kiniski. And Sam Muchnick was there himself. And it was a sold-out house, and they were honored on television. And I got my St. Louis programs that I had gotten from Pat O'Connor's widow, Julie, autographed by those guys, and I still have them. It's my most prized piece of wrestling memorabilia. That was the good part. The bad part was Brian Pillman didn't show up. And I was the one that Bruce Pritchard said, call the hotel and find out what time he checked out. And I'm sorry, I still get emotional because Brian was a friend of mine. We had worked together in WCW, and he was from Cincinnati. I was from Louisville, 90 miles down the road. And when I was in Smoky Mountain Wrestling, I would do radio, and he would be driving back from Atlanta to Cincinnati, and he would hear the radio, and he'd call me, and I'd get that voice on my answer machine, that raspy voice. Hey, I heard you, on the radio with, those guys in Manchester, and it was great. And we would talk. I called the hotel, and I said, I'm with the WWF, and I'm trying to find out what time Brian Pillman checked out, because he hasn't reported to the show today. And the guy said, Brian had passed away. And he said, hold on. And he went back in the back, and he picked up the phone, and he said, Mr. Pillman is dead. And I had to tell Harvey Whippleman, downtown Bruno, go get Bruce Pritchard. He needs to know this. And, that was how we found out that Brian was not going to be there that day. So as a wrestling fan, I was thrilled. There was Lou Thez and Sam Muchnick and Gene Kiniski and the Funk Brothers and Jack Briscoe and all those great champions. And I was getting their autograph, and I was having my picture taken with them. And at the same time, I had just found out that, my friend wasn't going to show up, and wasn't going to be back with us again. Brian Pillman was dead, and it was a weird day, man. It was a weird day.
That's intense. Thank you for sharing that story with us. And yeah, Brian Pillman was someone that always made a lot of fans smile, I think. This coming Monday night, night at the Classic Grand in Glasgow. You're going to be you'll have got over any jet lag by the time you get here. You'll be, the drugs will have worn off a little bit.
Yeah, I'm going to sleep off. I'm coming in on the 13th. I'm going to take 2 days to sleep off the drugs that takes me to get in a metal tube and fly 500 miles an hour, 5 miles in the air across an ocean. And I will be making my first appearances in the UK, and Glasgow is the first one. So everybody that's there that night, and you can go to jimcornettelive.co.uk and get tickets and information. But the people in Glasgow are going to see my first ever appearance outside the continental North American constraints.
And you know, if this Q&A were going to be with Stone Cold Steve Austin, we might have a cooler full of beer. This time we're going to have a cooler full of Sprite Zero ready to go. So Jim is not going to be parched at any point. He's going to be hydrated and ready to answer any questions. And
there you go. And the one thing is, Steve Austin, I love Steve. I've done his podcast lately, and he's going to be doing mine. And I love Steve. We worked together closely in the past. But Steve's been there. He's been there before, and he's coming back again. I've never been there before in 52 years, and I think it's probably going to be a while before I come back. So this is once in a lifetime. You're going to get the chance to see this.
Well, Jim, thank you so much for coming back on and talking to us again. We'll see you on Monday night. Jim, thank you so much. We'll see you on Monday.
Thank you, Kenny, very much. I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to it.